Killing. Now let's talk about the Mandera attack, whereby two vehicles carrying 12 police officers were escorting a bus to Mandera were hit by rocket-propelled grenades or RPGs by the Al-Shabaab, allegedly. We still don't have numbers or casualties there. But Professor, are we seeing a change of tact here, where now the launch by the terrorists or the Al-Shabaab is more directed towards the police officers rather than the people?
Trevor, unfortunately, there is a much bigger issue here than just Mandera case. The Security Council has ordered that the African force be reduced by 1,000 by the end of December. And sooner or later, everybody would be picking their logs and barrels and leaving Somalia. Probably Americans will fly out of Somalia somewhere. And then the warlords will be back. And unfortunately, one of the things we have not done, we have not secured our border. I've been calling for an investment to secure Kenya border, perhaps purchasing balloon from Israel and other things so that we can have a constant watch over our border and the right to shoot if somebody is violating. And that needed to have been done by now, with the understanding with the Somalia government that a 25-kilometer parallel on our border is a no-go zone, and such that we can have a permanent understanding who crosses, who does not cross. Somalia itself right now as a country is not able to secure itself. And if you take the African force out and the rest of the people melt out, we are back to zero-sum game. Yeah. And that will even impact us rather than what you are seeing in Mandera.
Isn't the vetting where the problem really lies? Because how do you tell who's who?
You see, these people are much more sophisticated than who's who. Yeah. They're continuously evolving, like Mustafa will tell you. And, you know, you may think your friend or your neighbor, but your neighbor is in a much more complex web of a situation than you do know. Yeah. Okay, so we are seeing that in Europe, we are seeing that in America, we are seeing that everywhere. Mm-hmm. And in Nigeria. And Kenya is going to be wide open to attack. So this is what we are talking about.
Okay. Dr. Mustafa, what solutions do we have for this? Because we're seeing attacks and we're talking about border patrols, but how do we vet them?
The first point here, Trevor, is that we should all regret the fact that the Security Council is asking for a drawdown of the personnel in Somalia. Somalia has not stabilized. There isn't a very strong Somali National Army that we can say is going to contain Al-Shabaab. We've seen a string of horrific attacks in Mogadishu in the last few days. So how can it be that in Afghanistan we are having a surge to contain the Taliban, and in Somalia we are seeing that personnel are being asked to draw down, or rather the AMISOM is being asked to reduce its personnel. The whole issue about coherence of the AMISOM in Somalia itself has been a question. What kind of a Somali National Army do we have? An army that has been trained by multiplicity of national armies and trainers from around the world, and that coherence is lacking. The issue of Somalia has to be dealt with inside Somalia. The Somali National Army has got to be trained and equipped. They are the ones who are going to contain Al-Shabaab. They feel the pinch most. Now, if that is not done and is done properly, then the neighboring countries are going to suffer for a very long time to come. The second point here is the issue of addressing violent extremism and ideological pushback. We've said again and again that military solutions in and of itself is not going to work in Somalia. There must be a concerted effort to address the ideology that is fanning, that is driving this conflict in Somalia.
Yeah. Dr. Hassan, what do you think are the solutions here?
just to pick up to where Dr. Mustafa had left, you know, hard power has its own limitations. And as a country, we need to define, have a clear strategy and clear objectives in what we want to accomplish in Somalia. Somalia is our neighbor. I think for far too long, we never took that problem as our problem. And we thought somehow that's something external, that we may make some contribution, but we can only do so much. You did mention an issue of vetting.
Yeah.
And the truth is, a lot of these attacks are not just coming directly from Somalia. Some of them are actually happening from people who are already here.
So they're homegrown.
A lot of it had to do with, to be frank, corruption. Corruption is about time we acknowledge that corruption is a national security issue. It's threatening our very existence as a country. In recent weeks, the attacks, spectacular attacks you saw in Mogadishu that claimed lives of hundreds, we are not completely immune to that. So we should not be reactionary, have a reactionary policy. We should be proactive in terms of countering this threat, both by use of soft power, diplomatic power, and military power. So we should not just focus on one strategy or the other, or just wake up one morning when our men and women in uniform have been massacred or killed, and then say, well, now we want to beef up our borders, because, you know, this problem has been going on for a number of years right now. So we need consistency and coherence in our national security strategy and our intervention in Somalia.
Okay.
I think that has to be clear.
Right. George?
Trevor, we are looking at Mandera. And you see, it's not Mandera that only borders Somalia. We have places like Wajir, we have places like Garissa. But why are these attacks only concentrated in Mandera and Lamu? And are we looking at Al-Shabaab, or we are looking at an enemy within? Because for these people to be able to operate within Mandera, there must be collaboration with the locals. And this is what we need to investigate. Why is it only happening in Mandera? It's not easy for you to walk around with an RPG, fire it against the police without people having seen you and reported this. Is this lack of popular intelligence, or our intelligence organs not working? And remember, we are talking about a terror group.
Yeah.
This is, we're talking about the Al-Shabaab. So far, Al-Shabaab have not owned the responsibility. They have not said that we are the people that are responsible for that attack. And as you've said, these people are not attacking civilian targets. They're actually targeting the police. They're actually targeting, the security agencies. They're attacking the military camps. They're hitting police convoys, no longer attacking civilians. So are we looking at a group that has moved from being a terror group to a guerrilla group? These are guerrilla tactics that are being used here, aimed at a particular target. And this particular target is not civilian. They're not willing to to win any propaganda wars by hitting civilians anymore. So are we seeing Al-Shabaab now bringing the war to us and saying that now we have transformed from a terror group now, you people in Somalia, we've come to Kenya, we're going to fight you. And when we are fighting you, we are fighting the Kenyan government by dealing with the security apparatus. So we just don't need to say that this is Al-Shabaab that is attacking military targets in Mandera and Lamu. We need to dig deeper and see, are we having local players here? Because remember, as I've said, we are not witnessing this any other places like Wajir and Garissa, but these attacks are concentrated in Mandera. And it has been like this for a very long time.
Okay.
What are we facing?
Okay. And Prof, the simple fact that they're using sophisticated weapons like RPGs and all that, should that worry the security systems in Kenya? And what should they do to ensure this doesn't happen?
Well, George brought, Trevor, George brought some very important points here. And I've had, unfortunately, some leaders or politicians make a pronouncement like we have wiped out Al-Shabaab. That is so far from the truth. The point is, these people metamorphoses into something else. Either lone wolf, which you cannot predict, but can have one person can eliminate a lot of people within a very short time. The question is, what is happening within Kenya? How well are we prepared for the next process? ISIS, as they get controlled in the Middle East, are going to move somewhere. They are moving to Europe, and Africa will be the most vulnerable of all. We've been talking about that for a long time. Are our police prepared? Are our armed forces, our disciplined forces, are we prepared for the next step? This is the major question that we have. George mentioned corruption. Yeah. But I'm afraid that here in Kenya, we are so divided as an ethnic group than at any time in the history. I just come from Tanzania, which has more ethnic groups than we do. And nobody's talking about tribes. Nobody's talking about this group and that group. We really need a soul searching with each other within the country. Yeah. Because so long as the elements, whether it's Pokot or whether it's Baringo, whether it's somewhere, when some people feel distressed, they are not part of the pie, they are going to be a danger to the whole system of what we are talking about. And so the discussion, dialogue need to happen within us. Mm-hmm. And we need to then be able to look at our disciplined forces and the role they need to play in order to reinforce the harmony that we are creating.
Okay. Dr. Mustafa, should we have a change of tact here? Because we're also seeing that they continuously are attacking the police escorts. They know when a bus is heading to Mandera, there'll be an escort with it, so we target that escort, making them sitting ducks. But then the other question is, should we withdraw those escorts? And if we do, then what happens to the buses?
It's a difficult thing to do. Now, withdrawing the escorts means that you're leaving the civilians vulnerable. Having the escorts there, you find that Al-Shabaab is attacking those escorts. It's remember, one of the structural issues here that push terrorists to attack people, security agencies, a country, is the presence or the absence of government. Poorly governed areas. Government has got to be present in each and every space that is a territory of the Republic of Kenya. Yeah. And so it's important that the visibility of security officers is actually there. And it is the duty of the security agencies to protect those civilians. The security agencies now are being targeted by Al-Shabaab. If they are not there, then Al-Shabaab will target the civilians. What should be done is just to increase the presence of security personnel to a level that Al-Shabaab would think twice before they actually attack. And terrorists will always go for soft targets, and a police escort is normally actually a soft target. And so there is need to harden those targets. There is need to provide better equipment for the escorts, and there is need for better checking, intelligence gathering, and making sure that the intelligence that is gathered is actually acted on by the police and the military. Okay.
Dr. Hassan, how do we keep up with this metamorphosis? Because we're seeing whenever we try something new, the Al-Shabaab pick it up, and they're also coming up with new things. How do we keep up with it so that we're always ahead of the war?
You know, the only constant in life, Trevor, is change. Mm. That's the only constant we have in life. And in the light of not just Al-Shabaab, but even other extremist groups have been doing, they've been changing tact so they can be able to outsmart security apparatus and agencies of the state. Now, Dr. Mustafa just mentioned the idea about beefing up security in those places. But I think also what is more important than just beefing up the security is building some confidence. Because as George mentioned earlier, you cannot walk around with an RPG without someone seeing you. Yeah. You must be having collaborators, or at least say someone who is keeping quiet. Now, building confidence, because you understand every time sometimes our security forces are conducting operations in some of these places, you have a lot of innocent victims. These people are actually not willing to cooperate with government if the strategy is one that think it may be harmful to them. So we need to change the way we approach that. But having said that, it's also important to understand that while it might not be completely a change of tact, these terrorist groups operate using an ideology as an organizing principle. Now, that ideology that they espouse cannot win you lots of hearts and minds when you're just targeting civilians, because a lot of them are some of the people you actually need to support here. And so attacking the security operators serves some of their purpose of saying, you see, we are not exactly focusing on the innocents, because some of those innocents, based on the ideology and people who are familiar with terrorists and the kind of ideology they espouse, goes counter to some of the things they're actually trying to tell people. And so turning that into security agents become a lot easier in trying to convince that, look, we're not really attacking you guys, we're attacking the state, and this state is working with our enemies, who is a common enemy. And so we need to be aware, but also we need to be ready to change in line and in the light of the changing tactics of Al-Shabaab.
Yeah, and that's an interesting perspective, George, because then it means that they're trying to ensure that their propaganda is still spreading towards the masses, and that brings in the issue of accomplices and witnesses. So witnesses, if they buy into the ideology, then they have no reason of showing up to the security forces and giving information. And there's also the flip side of it, where you show up to a police station and say, I've seen someone with some guns and grenades, and you're the first one to be taken in, because apparently you're an accomplice. So is it that the security forces need to change their way of dealing with information and intelligence that they get from the ground, or how does this work now?
Trevor, we've not started escorting buses recently. I mean, I was involved in escorting these buses from Malindi to Mokoe, even before Al-Shabaab came to the arena. We've been having issues of banditry in those areas, Lamu, going to Mandera. And I'm looking at a situation whereby we're having the same problem. Only that now we've brought in the Al-Shabaab. And as I said earlier, we might be concentrating so much in looking at the Al-Shabaab, yet we have other people inside this country that are interested in occupying territory. Ask yourself, why is it that? Because initially, when it was Al-Shabaab, we know they evolve in tactics. But when we are looking at Al-Shabaab, initially they were targeting both security apparatus, security installations, and civilians. But this time round, we are only seeing a group of people that are actually targeting security agencies, not civilians anymore. And in particular territories, are we pushing the government or the state out of Boni Forest? Because look at Boni. We've been having an operation in Boni for more than a year now, but still we're having the same problem. Recently, a security convoy was attacked. We've said now, yes, we need to improve the equipment that we have. We brought in personnel carriers. We've seen that they're being also destroyed by the enemies. These are people with intel. They know when these vehicles are on the move, and they know where to put their choke point and hit them. So what we need to do, as opposed to escorting these buses, bringing in more equipment, we should have intel-based policing. We should invest in people. Because as I said, not easy for you to walk around with a RPG amongst a civilian population that does not look at you and say, this person is not a policeman. So we should have popular intelligence. Let the security agencies work with the people. If you have that gap where the people are not willing to share information with the security or with the state, then it means we're in a big problem. And as I've said, look at Mandera. Mandera, up to a certain point, is now bandit country. It's being occupied by these elements, we call them the Al-Shabaab. Yet we are not seeing Al-Shabaab in Somalia telling us, yes, we are the people that are carrying out these attacks across the border. You remember, this is a propaganda war. Why are they not banking on that and saying, yes, we've taken the war to Kenya and our people are there, they are fighting the Kenyan government, and now we are no longer targeting civilians, but we are fighting the state. So I'm looking at a situation whereby we have internal enemies, people that are collaborating with those elements that we call the Al-Shabaab, people that are arming them. And as he said, Daktari said here, corruption is a major player into this. We have a porous border. We say we are going to come up with a perimeter wall to make sure that we've created a buffer zone between Kenya and Somali. We don't know how this has happened, but we're still witnessing these attacks each and every other day. And the experience is getting more complicated because now they were using small arms. They have brought in RPGs. Where did these RPGs get their way into Kenya? Along the border. Along the border, we have the border patrol units from the AP. We've posted there the military. We have the military in Boni. Permanent camps. We're not talking about harbors. Permanent camps. But still, we're seeing them, we're still witnessing these attacks. So this is a more bigger problem than we are discussing here. And somebody is not just being telling Kenyans the truth of what we are actually facing in Mandera. Because we are looking at an occupational force now. Not people who are just coming in for propaganda war and crossing the border back into Somali. They have actually occupied Mandera and Boni.
Professor, is there a chance we're looking at the wrong enemy here? Because I've seen on the Daily Nation website, there's even a story about Somali militants, Al-Shabaab, executing 4 men for allegedly engaging in espionage against them. And they were claiming that these people are giving information to the AMISOM about them. So it means the civilians are actually trying. But are we looking at the wrong enemy?
Trevor, George mentioned a very important point. And that is population-based intel group. There cannot be anything that is as powerful as that. The Israelis have what's called 3Ds, detect, deter, and destroy. In America, the popular saying, when you see something, say something. Now, the point about it is when corruption is so rampant, when we are so divided as people, you will not get both. And those really form the cornerstone of security of any country. And therefore, we need to realign ourselves. We need to not be reactionary. We need to rethink our strategy very, very carefully, harmonizing with the civilian and the people of Kenya. That's what we need to do.
All right. Dr. Mustafa? Are we looking at the wrong enemy here? Should we start looking within ourselves rather than outside and blame it on Al-Shabaab?
No, the enemy is the same. There is Kenyan Al-Shabaab. There is Somali Al-Shabaab. We have Kenyans in Somalia. It's just that it's the operational, tactical, and strategic issues here that we need to look at. How do we fight this enemy that is occupying parts of Boni Forest, as George is talking about, at the operational level, at the tactical and moving to strategic level? How do we implement some of the strategic issues Professor Midamba is talking about in terms of securing our border so that we don't have infiltration? Even as we deal with the Al-Shabaab inside Kenya, we don't have the infiltration from Somalia. At the end of this, Trevor, at the end of this, we will find that we have to deal with the root causes of the challenges that are facing us. People like Dr. Khanenje doing excellent work at the Horn Institute for Strategic Studies to really study and follow the trends, the transformations of these groups and how they can be dealt with. We have to base our actions on evidence, fact, and what is going to work. And it's about time that Kenya and the rest of the countries in Africa focus on the interest of the countries that they are serving, the interest of Kenya, the interest of Africans. We should not be waiting for the Europeans to come and tell us how to deal with Al-Shabaab. We should deal with it in the manner that we know, we study them, understand them, and seek for support from our friends in Europe or elsewhere in the Middle East to address this challenge where we are unable to address those challenges.
Dr. Hassan?
Yeah, Trevor, thanks. You know, to win any war, you have to understand your enemy. You can't fight an enemy that is invisible that you do not understand. And I don't think we've done enough job in trying to understand the enemy we are facing. This enemy is fierce, this enemy is adaptive, is a very determined enemy. And unless we stop diminishing the status of this enemy and say, hey, we are facing a real threat as a country, as a nation, as a region, so that we can actually adopt a strategy that involves other players, but not, as Dr. here just mentioned, not relying or waiting for the UN, for the West to give us some handouts to implement some of what they want or to actually protect our own. We need our own homegrown strategy that recognizes the enemy that we have, that this enemy is very fluid enemy. He's very amorphous, but he's a very determined and very effective in the strategy they employ. And unfortunately, their success is to our detriment. We have to recognize that.
George, what do you reckon are now the solutions going forward?
Trevor, I think as Dr. Hassan has said, we need to understand the enemy.
Yes.
We need to know the enemy. Because as I've said, from the 90s, the security situation in Lamu and Mandera has been the same. And I said it was only complicated by the coming in of Al-Shabaab. And you know, when you're dealing with Al-Shabaab, the calling has always been, you need to get your forces out of Somalia. We're not hearing of that anymore. The Al-Shabaab have gone quiet. They're not taking responsibilities of these attacks that we're witnessing in Lamu and Mandera per se. They're not talking about it. Are we looking at a situation where we've gone back to the 90s, where we are dealing with bandits who have only taken, they've only gone under the umbrella of Al-Shabaab? Do we know what these people want? Because without knowledge, without knowing exactly what we are facing, there's no way we can come up with a proper plan, we cannot come up with a proper strategy of dealing with the situation. So as much as we are only focusing on Al-Shabaab, I think we have more problems internally, especially in those areas of Mandera and Lamu, than we are actually willing to face. Because I asked earlier, why are we not witnessing this kind of the same attacks in Garissa? Initially, when Al-Shabaab were coming in, we had so many attacks in Garissa. We had attacks in Wajir, all those areas that are along the common border between Kenya and Somalia. But these other areas are now peaceful. We are not witnessing the same kind of attacks there. These attacks are only concentrated now in Mandera and Lamu. So what are we facing here? Because we can talk so much and say, yes, let's take the military there. We have the RDU there. We've taken the GSU there. But this is still not working. The attacks are being carried unsuccessfully. Remember, these attacks are succeeding. You fire an RPG at a police convoy and get away with it. You destroy an armed personnel carrier, you get away with it. We don't have any response. Who are we dealing with here? Without knowing the enemy, Trevor, we will not come up with a proper plan of how to deal with the situation. We'll still witness these attacks.
Gentlemen, I want us to cover two more topics: the national resistance movement and the preparations the police should have for them, and the standoff between the US and North Korea. But before we get into all that, Usha is here with the feedback. Usha, what are they saying on social media?
Right, they are saying a lot. Of course, we have already discussed two topics, that is Mandera and Laikipia. People seem to have really taken issue with Laikipia because that is more popular in terms of feedback. So I'll just read some of them. We have John, who says corruption and ethnic politics are a threat to national security. These two vices have to be dealt with by all possible means. We also have James, who says there was a time when CID were on the ground infiltrating and destroying criminal networks. Now they pay more attention to political opponents and not criminals, e.g. NIS with phone records of judges and not those who threaten the public peace. We also have Leonard, who says our military should be based in areas near the Somali border, not in Nairobi or Nyali. We have Lena, who says our military, that's just the one I've read, sorry. We have Samuel, who says the ranches are private land and there are laid down ways of acquiring the same without killing people and animals. We have Jarvis, who says, but how do you have a conversation with a community that's armed and won't put down their arms to allow this talk? We have Roy, who says this is pure politics, what happened in Laikipia. We also have Papio, who says the issue in Laikipia is more complex than what it has been made to be. The solution will be reached only if local leaders come on board. We have John, who says if the TJRC saw the light of day, do you think it would have perhaps mitigated some of our major political, social and economic problems? We have James, who says, in recent weeks, there were leaders who literally stated that rule of law and loss of property meant more to them than loss of life, that is, of protesters. The same voices are silent now. We have Samuel, who says, the Al-Shabaab are people with us. We need to let the security know them. The security should not hide them due to corruption. So I'm not really sure what George would say about this. Do you think that perhaps apart from the Al-Shabaab themselves, do we ourselves as Kenyans, do we know these people, or is this intelligence that is only with the police?
I think that is where the problem is. Yeah. Because as I've said, we are only being told that these are Al-Shabaab. But we don't have evidence to prove this, that we are actually dealing with Al-Shabaab. Because I've said it's not the first time we're witnessing these kind of attacks. It used to happen before, in the 90s. I personally was escorting these buses along the Malindi-Lamu Road. These buses were also being escorted from Nairobi, Garissa, Wajir. So let's look at this very closely. Are we still looking at a situation whereby it's the Al-Shabaab that are carrying out this attack, or we are looking at local militia as it was before? If we don't address this, then we will not find a solution to this problem.
Okay. Usha?
Right, just one last tweet. We have Smart, who says it's always been about security forces because they kill, stop them from doing their dirty work in our soil. And that is, of course, all the feedback we have managed to read right now. But we are doing more topics, of course. So keep your conversation, keep the conversation going. Keep your comments coming on all the different topics that we are about to tackle. Hashtag AMLiveNTV. That is how you can reach us, and I would be happy to direct your questions to the panel. Trevor.
Thanks, Usha. We appreciate that. I know you sieve through most of them, and there's hundreds of them, but you're doing a great work with that. Thank you for making time for us. But there's still one more here from Anunda Andrew. Says there is a big problem with the security systems. Traveled in several occasions, seeing police stopping vehicles along the highways, but they're not checking. They just walk around. And I'm sure you've seen that even in these buildings around here. You can easily walk in with a Seska and nobody detects that. And he still continues to say that that means that even with the security at checkpoints, terrorists can still come in with weapons because nobody bothers to examine the vehicles. So is this an issue, Prof, before we get into the NRM and how the police should prepare, is it an issue of complacency with our security forces themselves? Because some people might actually risk it because you know you're not going to be checked. You just come in with your RPGs. And in the event that they try and check, then you just call them to the side and hand them kitu kidogo, like we always say.
It's much more complex than that, Trevor.
Yeah.
There are several things that you need to be taking a look at. One is what kind of training are these security people having? Others are as simple as your physical strength and how you look, you know, and your own. You're a security person. The second point is the people doing damage are much more sophisticated than what we have. And the equipment, the kind of equipment we have for checking and all that cannot reach them. If you are in Israel, you will not see a security person standing. But they are checking you. They're checking everything. They're checking every movement of every person. So what kind of investment have we done as a country on the on equipment and everything? Yeah. That is a tall order, really, when you consider everything else. But it's something we must do as a country. So we must have a sense of priority in terms of what we are going to do. First of all, sensitizing the people, bringing people together and harmonizing them to know that this is where we are as a country and this is where we are going. Okay. It's going to be a tall order simply because there is a massive unemployment among youth. There is a sense of hopelessness. Yeah. I talk to a lot of young people, and you can detect, and when people are talking about, I'm not part of Kenya, there is something else. What message are they telling you? And so we need to never just rule out those and camouflage them, because in it is a complex web of issues that we must deal with as a country.
All right.